Hey everybody! So today we're looking at the Taiping Rebellion. Sometimes this is called the Christian Taiping Rebellion because of its connection to Christianity. So we're going to continue with this question for this part of the unit. What factors in the 1800s allowed the West to advance ahead of China? So we will talk about context, Christian Taiping Rebellion, and the leader of that movement was Hong Xiuquan. We will mention the source for this part of the course, and then we will mention what's coming up next time. This is how historians typically explain the dynastic cycle in China. So just start over here. So let's say you've got a new dynasty that restores peace from the warring, whatever was happening before, and then they appoint loyal officials, and they redistribute the land to the peasants, and they build infrastructure, canals, and roads, and those kinds of things. And then after several generations, the new dynasty becomes aging, and the aging dynasty tends to neglect their responsibilities. They have corruption, the government's losing control in the countryside, the walls for defensive purposes begin to decay, people start facing heavier taxes. This aging dynasty is going to lose the mandate of heaven because it is not taking care of the people the way that it should. Problems will begin to occur, maybe floods or famine or earthquakes, invasions, armed bandits, these kinds of things. All of these things will be viewed as a sign or a symbol that the government has lost the mandate of heaven. And then a new dynasty will come in, they'll claim the mandate of heaven, and the cycle will continue. So at this point in the Qing dynasty, we're very much at an aging dynasty. Okay, the Qing dynasty in the mid to late 1800s, very much aging, had been in power for 2 centuries, so aging dynasty. If you want to understand the Christian Taiping Rebellion that took place between 1850 and 1864, you need to know something about China's ethnic groups. So most people outside of China don't seem to realize, especially in the U.S., there are lots of different ethnic groups within China, just like there are lots of different ethnic groups within the United States. So Hong Xiuquan was a member of a specific ethnic group that experienced a lot of oppression. And you can see here this map, and we've been talking a lot about Guangzhou and Canton down here in the south. And this is the general region where Hong Xiuquan was from, but he was of this Hakka ethnic group. And they had migrated to the southern part of China later than other groups. So the Hakka were not treated very well. They were often treated poorly. So keep that in mind. This is a man who has experienced oppression and is not satisfied with it. So this is his name, Hong Xiuquan. And this is how he is depicted later when he becomes the heavenly king of the great peace. The word Taiping means great peace. So heavenly king of the Taiping, or heavenly king of the great peace. It's important to realize that in China there was a civil service exam that people took to determine their careers. Hong took the civil service exam, the preliminary exam, and he passed that. But then he had to take another exam to get his degree. Okay? Now, if he had gotten his degree, it would have entitled him to certain privileges. He would have been able to wear the scholar's robes. He would have received a small pension from the government. So it would have helped if he had gotten his degree. He took the exam the first time, and he failed. he took the exam a second time, and he failed again. The third time, so remember that Hong was from this region, the southern part of China. The third time to take this exam, he travels to Guangzhou. All right. And while he travels, he comes upon a Christian missionary who gives him some excerpts of the Bible that have been translated into Chinese so he can read them. And apparently he looked at them, but he didn't really read them carefully. So he has these samples of the Bible in Chinese, but he doesn't really know what to do with them at that point. He's taking the exam for the third time, and he fails again a third time. So after he's gotten these scriptures from this Christian missionary, he fails a third time. He starts having visions. And this does not come from me. This comes from another historian, John Willis Jr., who wrote a book called Mountain of Fame. And in this book, he describes what these visions were like for Hong. So this is how the author describes them. In his visions, so in Hong's visions, he was taken up to heaven and washed to cleanse himself of the filth of the world. His belly was cut open, and his internal organs replaced by new, clean ones. Then he was led before a magnificent divine figure with a long golden beard, who lamented that the people of the world had lost their original hearts and were deluded by malicious demons. They no longer worshipped him, and they drank wine, smoked opium, and lived lives of debauchery and worldly vanity. Hong was given a demon-slaying sword and a golden seal that forced demons to flee. Once he watched his father and elder brother chastise Confucius as one who had done the most to delude the people of the world. And that's the end of the quote. When it talks about Hong seeing his father and elder brother, that's referring there to God and Jesus. Because what happens is Hong takes the exam a fourth time and fails again. And then he finds again these scriptures that the missionary had given him when he was taking the test a third time. And he reads these scriptures in Chinese, and suddenly he realizes in these visions he has been seeing God, and he's been seeing Jesus, and he believes that Jesus is his older brother, and he believes that he is Jesus' younger brother, and so he is God's Chinese son. A historian, Jonathan Spence, one of the best historians on Asian history, has written about this. This is the title and the cover page for his book, God's Chinese Son, The Taiping Heavenly Kingdom of Hong Xiuquan. And so at that point, Hong begins his own mission to convert as many people to Christianity as possible. So by 1849, he has converted 10,000 people living in the countryside. 2 years later, he openly declares rebellion against the Qing government. This was a horrible crime that one could commit in the Qing dynasty. Rebellion against the government was just one of the worst things you could do. And the Qing government is already aging and corrupt. And remember how they're upset that they had lost the first Opium War, and they're trying to regain order and restore peace. So the Qing come after Hong Xiuquan and his Taiping rebels. And so you can see here the government comes down to where Hong Xiuquan was at that time, down in these southern provinces. He was from Guangdong, and at this point he's in Guangxi, and the government is forcing him out of his base, and so you can see the red arrows where Hong Xiuquan has to gradually make his way up towards Nanqing. The other arrows, we'll come back to those in a second, but the Qing were merciless in executing any rebels that they found. So one of the worst ways that they would kill someone was with these devices here. It would shut people up inside these baskets and basically expose them to the elements where they would starve and be really withered. A description of them at the time said that the people looked more like skeletons than living beings, and then they would be executed. So it was a horrible thing to do. Going back to the map, though, if you look, Hong Xiuquan and his rebels get all the way up to Nanjing, and they take up their base of operations there. And once they are there, here is the throne of the Heavenly King. This is the throne that Hong Xiuquan had. This is by March of 1853. And by this point, this actual area that Hong and his rebels took over used to be part of a Ming dynasty imperial palace. That's why it looks so beautiful. And so anyway, Hong Xiuquan is taking up shop here in Nanjing in 1853, and they rule for 11 years, from 1853 up through 1864 in that area. So what did these rebels believe? What did they teach? And so looking at the source for that's related to this, I asked you to look at excerpts from the land system of the Heavenly Kingdom, which is also called the Taiping Economic Program. I have a variety of questions there. A lot of those were on the source. Why would Confucian scholars be opposed to the system suggested in these passages? What strengths, what weaknesses are in this program? In what ways does the system envisioned here differ from what was already in place during the mid-1800s in the Qing dynasty? And some other questions you should think about. How do you think Westerners viewed the Taiping Rebellion? How do you think missionaries, like Christian missionaries, what do you think they thought about this? What do you think merchants thought about this? And other governments? So what did all these different groups of Westerners think about this? That's very important, and I want you to be thinking about that. I'll go back real quick. Just to give you some more examples that were not in the reading of what the Taiping believed. So Hong Xiuquan believed in segregating men and women so they wouldn't work together. He banned opium, prostitution, dancing, and drinking alcohol. He held money in a common treasury to distribute, to be shared by all, and that was in the reading. He did bring back the exam system, which I think is interesting since he failed 4 times. He brings it back, but he bases it on Chinese translations of the Bible and on his own religious revelations. Women could hold supervisory positions in his society, and then the land was divvied up based on the size of the family. That was also in the reading. He also rewrote the 10 Commandments to address some other things that weren't in the Bible. So thou shalt not worship corrupt spirits, which is similar to thou shalt not worship other gods. Thou shalt not kill or injure men. Thou shalt not commit adultery or anything unclean. So the Qing government was very much opposed, obviously, to Hong Xiuquan, and so it's important that I show you 2 things. So one is Zheng Guofan, who was general at that time. I'll come back to that. Zheng Guofan wrote this proclamation against the rebels, and then also you can look at it here if you want to. Hong Xiuquan was not liked by everybody. Zheng Guofan is one of the people who didn't like him. And there was also a second opium war taking place at the same time. So once that war was finally over, then the Taiping Rebellion was put down by the Westerners and the Qing government. So that's all I got.